Well, hello there, you're watching the press preview. A first look at what is on the front pages. In the next half hour, then, we will see what's making the headlines with the columnist and broadcaster Steve Richards and the journalist and author Ella Whelan. Welcome to both of you. Great to see you. First, though, let's check out the front pages, shall we? And The Guardian reporting that a new strain of coronavirus has been discovered as London is placed in Tier 3. That is also the lead for The Telegraph, which quotes the Health Secretary blaming the new mutation on an exponential rise in cases in the South East. The Metro greets that news in blunt fashion. Their headline, Mutant COVID. That is also the lead for The Times, which calls it a new strain. The Express points out that the latest round of changes will mean 34 million people are living in Tier 3. According to The Eye, Boris Johnson is being asked to reconsider the relaxation of social distancing rules over Christmas. The Daily Mail, too, asks whether Christmas is in jeopardy. The Yorkshire Post, though, says that Leeds could be making the opposite move to London by dropping into Tier 2. So, Steve Richards, Ella Whelan are here. Just when you thought, you know, after the vaccine, the light, the tunnel, etc., we've got a mutant strain and millions more people heading into Tier 3. Steve?
Yeah, this is the darkest of thrillers, isn't it, this pandemic? Just as there was a sense of, to use that cliche, light at the end of the tunnel, there's a really dark mood today. I watched Matt Hancock's statement in the House of Commons, and it was so far removed, really, from the near euphoria over the vaccine excitement a week or so ago as we got to hear about the new strain, London moving into Tier 3. And although London will take this huge economic hit, which will have implications for the rest of the country, of course it should go into Tier 3, as others have done, when the figures show this thing is raging. And it's clearly raging in parts of the UK in spite of the tiers. So this was inevitable.
Daily Telegraph, we were looking at, or we're still looking at there. They're talking about, Ella, up to 150,000 jobs at risk as restaurants, pubs and theatres forced to shut in the capital. They will have had a lot of bookings the week before Christmas. The stock, goodness knows, does it go in the bin? Can they freeze it? Who knows? But the disruption is huge, isn't it, for all of these businesses?
Well, this is the thing, which is, on the one hand, Steve is right. The numbers coming out, especially in and around where I am, in East London, are pretty frightening, and you would accept that something has to be done about that, but that position has to be balanced with the reality of what moving into Tier 3 means for many people. Means, you know, people losing their jobs in the hospitality industry, people losing income, you know, threats of early closures in schools means sending panics, and mums in particular, into serious panic, thinking about how they're going to deal with childcare. All of these things have to be part of a consideration. And you know, I think I was on last week talking with Sonia Soda. We were doing the paper review on the evening that the vaccination had been rolled out, and Steve's right, there was a lot of kind of elation. But I think I remember saying that you know, Matt Hancock, within seconds after announcing his excitement and squeezing out a tear or two about the vaccine, made it very clear that we weren't out of the woods. And actually, I think that rather than this coming as a shock, that without sounding too conspiratorial, this kind of move was always on the cards. I mean, he's throughout the papers, it's covered the fact that he's saying that there's no certainty that the rules around Christmas won't be changed. And it's that kind of constant uncertainty that I think is really the most damaging thing for people. You know, the reality is, this virus doesn't necessarily follow rules. There is going to always be an element of uncertainty about this. You have to be able to be flexible and reactive. But this feels like a knee-jerk reaction, which really is only, if you think about it, a delay of consequences. Because what happens if you shut down the whole of London's social life? The problem's still going to be there again when we open up. So as a strategy, this lockdown release just doesn't seem to be convincing. It doesn't seem to be working, and the damages perhaps are going to outweigh the positives of protecting against the virus.
Yeah, especially if the excitement of release means people go out more than they would have done. There is an element of behavioural science which needs to come in here, doesn't it? Let's go to The Guardian then, shall we? Millions more face tier 3 as a new strain of the virus emerges. The millions more, they say, equates to more than 60% of England facing winter under the toughest COVID restrictions. We'll come on to Leeds, which might take that number down a little bit later. But tell us about this new strain. You know, you talked about the darkest of thrillers, discovered in Kent, being analysed in Portland Down. The question is, what does it do? What does it mean with the vaccine rollout and so on? But, you know, a little bit more reassuring from the Chief Medical Officer about that tonight than Steve.
Yeah, the number 10 press conference, he was pretty reassuring that the vaccine will be effective against this new strain. But it is, again, I mean, I don't think this is knee-jerk. I mean, if figures are ramping up hour by hour with a new strain which apparently could be, no one knows for sure, could be more infectious, and the last one was pretty infectious, I don't think anyone has any choice but to be absolutely constraining on activity and try and manage this nightmare until the vaccines are effective. But yeah, you're right. He was optimistic about the effect of the vaccine. As far as they can tell, they're not 100% sure. But it is another kind of twist to this, as I said, this kind of drama. It is like a film noir. You just think you've escaped and then something else comes and you're trapped again. But you know, that is the reality, has been the reality, was the reality when the vaccine was announced. And we're just going to have to busk it. But I don't say that complacently. I know what hell businesses are going through, have been in areas which have been in tier 3 already. I mean, I was going to do a live show on Wednesday and it's gone. It's going to be streamed though. But you know, theatres have been planning Christmas concerts, pantomimes and all the rest of it, all closing, well, in parts of the country anyway. And that's just one example of many. And the economic fallout is terrible. But I don't think the government has any choice but to constrain. And the question is whether it's constraining enough.
Ella, I know you want to come in.
Yes. I think that this links actually to the piece we're going to go on to from the Yorkshire Post, which is talking about the fact that Leeds and other places might be coming down in terms of a step down from the tiers to tier 2. It's just interesting to know that no one talks about tier 1 anymore, do they? It's unheard of to talk about that. It's like a foreign country. It's expected that no one's going to come down at that. And can you even imagine anywhere not having any restrictions? We're sort of at this point where I think it's important, you know, occasionally to kind of take a step back and say, really, is this the world we're living in, and assess the reality of it. But the question about the restrictions and how effective they are, I think where I disagree with Steve is, or where I just ask some kind of forced to ask some questions, is this working? Because if lockdown and the process of pretty much just screeching society to a halt was an effective strategy in stopping the virus quickly, you would, and this whole kind of short, sharp shock that we heard that lockdowns were supposed to be earlier in the year, then you would expect places in the north to be coming now out of those kind of top tier restrictions. But as we know, places like Oldham, places like Liverpool had been, and some places have still been in the really high restrictions for months now. I mean, there are a lot of northerners out there.
But Liverpool went into tier 2 after lockdown, though, didn't it? And it's always been thrown up as this is what you do with mass testing and a goodwill, and there you go, you can come down. So
yes, but my point is that tier 2 is still very restrictive. I mean, it is still, we get lost here because you start thinking restrictions are normal because we've been in this bizarre situation, but it's still very restrictive. And there are lots of northerners out there who are kind of not exactly laughing at Londoners, because that's, I'm not saying that they're being unpleasant, but they're saying, well, I mean, welcome to our world. This is what we've been living in for a very long time now. And so the question is, does it work, or is it just a delay tactic? And delay tactics are sensible if they are for example, preventing the NHS from getting overrun, you know, or if it's to allow a space and time for which the vaccine to properly take hold and get to enough people. But the reasoning behind this is blurry. I think that's the most frustrating thing. And the consequences are not just businesses going under, which are important. It's not just people losing income, but it is that more general picture of the destruction of social life. So what happens to those isolated old and young people who haven't seen their friends or, another person for a long time?
I can answer it very precisely. It's working to some extent, but the degree to which it's not working is to do with it being looser than the lockdown we had famously in the spring, which was effective. Schools are open, and a lot of the contagion apparently is in schools and amongst younger people, although it's spreading to older people, which is why something has to be done about it. So to the degree it's not working, it's because it's looser this time for good reasons, but maybe it's just not feasible. That they wanted, and there was general agreement about this, schools to open, universities to open. And so it's been a looser lockdown than last time. And I think that's why it hasn't wholly worked. And you're right, it appears to be sort of scattergun. And, oh, blimey, we better do this here. Oh, what about here? And yet it comes back again. We're not going to get rid of it. So it is a case of how you suppress it until the vaccine's widely available.
Hold your thought. Sorry, Ella. Hold your thought for 1 second, if you don't mind, because we've had the news, obviously, as the Electoral College votes continue to be counted in America, that Joe Biden has now passed 270, which means he has formally been elected. President Trump, we've been sitting there waiting for the tweet. It has come. And the announcement is actually that the Attorney General, Bill Barr, the man who famously said that he had not seen any electoral fraud, will be leaving office. He said, our relationship has been a very good one. Just had a very nice meeting with Attorney General Bill Barr at the White House. Our relationship has been a very good one. He has done an outstanding job. As per letter, Bill will be leaving just before Christmas to spend the holiday with his family. So that is a form of acknowledgement, perhaps. We will wait further responses to the Electoral College, the formality of that process that leads to January the 20th and the inauguration of the next US president. We will await further pronouncements from Mr. Trump. Just a quick thought on that, then we will see if he continues to deny it, despite this next phase of the process going on.
I don't think he can much more. I mean, the clock is ticking and he's going. And so how he manages that will be quite amusing, I suspect. Not sinister. He's going.
I think the ongoing pantomime of Trump and his unwillingness to do the right thing and accept losers' consent will be a lesson to the importance of democracy to both sides, actually, to treat it seriously and not this kind of ridiculous show of bravado.
The Deputy Attorney General, Jeff Rosen, an outstanding person, is the next tweet, will become Acting Attorney General, etc., etc. The question is whether the new Attorney General is more likely to continue the court cases or the pardons or any other elements that is continuing as President Trump stays in office in this lame duck period, which he's been very active in terms of federal executions, for example. So we'll keep an eye on that. I do want to get to Christmas bubbles. A lot of people will be hearing the new variant mutation news, the London, Hertfordshire, Essex news, feeling quite concerned, not least because they've already planned the turkey pickup from the butchers or the supermarket. Ella, what do you reckon? The Prime Minister urged to rethink the Christmas bubbles is the lead for the eye.
We need to remember that the reason why the Christmas bubble thing it kind of put in as an idea and instituted wasn't because of the importance of a turkey, but it was because it was giving people that very, very important bit of respite of being able to see each other. It was actually a very serious thing. It's about trying to maintain some form of social normality and social fabric, and it's not to be poo-pooed, is what I'm trying to say. It was a very important thing. That the difficult question is, I mean, Anna, you mentioned behavioural psychology and how we manage these things. I think everyone knows that anecdotally, the fact that people are breaking the rules or bending them, that they are meeting indoors. I think everyone knows someone who's, gone to see their auntie or gone to see their mum or something like that. And so the question is, if shutting down the rest of society where people can sort of meet in a COVID secure format, whether it be in pubs or big halls or whatever it is, social clubs, and forcing them to sneak behind doors? Is that where the infection is spreading? And could that be managed a bit differently? So having some kind of room for a flexibility on discussion of how we actually get people to adhere to these rules and to do the right thing is, I think, a little bit lacking from this sort of definitely sounding like a knee-jerk crackdown on Christmas. I mean, it'd be mean to say it's Grinchy, but I think it's probably more serious than that.
Well, you're certainly making the argument that the hospitality sector does as well. Plenty more when we come back, including has time run out for a Brexit deal or not? Discussing that next. Well, welcome back. You are watching the press preview with me now, Steve Richards and Ella Whelan. So where are we on the Brexit talks? Guardian, first of all, their headline, it's down the bottom, so I have to read it to you. Deal is within reach after UK concession, quoting Barnier, suggesting that the EU's chief negotiator had said the Prime Minister's acceptance of the need to ensure that there is fair competition for British and European businesses as regulatory standards diverge over time, had unlocked the talks, despite difficult issues remaining. That is one plank of the three things remaining, of course, which is the level playing field. That all sounds good, if it's true. We move on to the Daily Telegraph, which talks about fishing is the key. Steve, what is the key to this?
There are about 3 or 4 different keys, but it is interesting that they're carrying on talking, and it's interesting that Barnier is indicating progress, and it's also interesting that it comes about with the UK finally, or the UK government, or Boris Johnson, finally accepting the reality that the UK is in many respects the weaker partner in this negotiation and will have to concede on things like level playing field, always were going to have to concede. But it looks as if they're moving in that direction, rather than the sort of calamity of a no deal, which, as one of the papers suggests, with the MP Roger Gale, who's not a natural kind of Remainer insurrectionist, saying Johnson would have to go if he failed to get a deal. I don't know whether those are the exact quotes, but that's the essence of the report. So it shows the pressure he's under to get a deal.
Yes, that's on the page 2 of the Metro, which we'll come to in more detail in just a moment. The other story you wanted to talk about, Ella, that a Brexit deal now is too late for the deadline. What are the specifics of what they mean about that, then?
Well, I mean, this is why I love doing this with Steve, because I have the almost mirror opposite opinion to him on Brexit, whereas I think that rather than seeing Boris Johnson's movement as a kind of final acceptance, I'm very concerned about all these red lines suddenly, like, poof, disappearing into thin air like they never existed. And the article in the Metro talking about the fact that it's too late for a deadline is pressing on this fact that, you know, this deal has to be made in basically a number of days at this point, that everyone's backs are up against the wall. And we all knew that it was going to come down to this. But the important point is that it shouldn't have, that Brexit wasn't a trade deal.
You've got 10 seconds. I apologise. We never have enough time on Brexit. Should we reconvene at 11:30 and do it in more detail? I bet you'll look forward to that. We'll see you then. Thank you very much indeed. Top stories are next. So, Steve Richards, Ella Whelan are here. Tier 3, perhaps some areas could cope with, but not a new strain. Ella, very depressing news today in the Times and elsewhere.
Yeah, what a difference a week makes. I mean, we were only just, it feels like, celebrating and breathing a sigh of relief when it came to the vaccine. There was light at the end of the tunnel. And now the news of this new strain, and I'm sure going to frighten a lot of people. Although I just will make the point that I think it's very important to say that we don't have enough information to make any kind of assessment. And, you know, Matt Hancock and Chris Whitty have both said this as well. It's not just me, that we don't know what to think about this new strain. There are only a kind of 1,100 cases. It looks like it's spreading quite rapidly. It's being investigated. It's something to think about. But there are several instances across the papers tonight where there is a suggestion that the new tier restrictions of tier 3 coming into London and Essex and Hertfordshire is because of this new strain, and that's not true. The reason why the we've been put into tier 3 now, as the Times reports, at 11 million people across London, is because of a rise in infection rates, not necessarily to do with the new strain. This is a very bleak picture being painted tonight. I mean, it's having knock-on effects in all kinds of areas. There's news that certain boroughs are encouraging schools in their area to close, Islington being one of them, sending panic through the hearts of parents, I'm sure, who are suddenly worried about childcare. Of course, people working in the hospitality industry, waiters and waitresses and people pulling pints, are going to have their jobs put under threat yet again. While we've only had a kind of few days, a week or so of respite, not that long. So this is a very bleak picture. And the questions that have to be asked is this the right thing to do? You've got to balance between the very real risk of the virus coming out of control, scary numbers where I am in Hackney and in East London, balanced with the continuing and deepening consequences of lockdowns like this and what they do to people's social lives, their economic situation, their finances, and their mental health.
Yes, and some might argue at this point maybe there was little choice with the rates in places like you are, obviously. Let's go to the Daily Mirror. And you're right, I suppose the difference is that the new virus mutation and the spike in cases shows association but not causation yet, doesn't it, Steve? They're certainly analysing this important down. They don't know if this rise in cases in places that got listed as tier 3 today is caused by the virus mutation, but certainly, as the Daily Mirror puts it, it just leads to more pain for very many people.
Yeah, I was watching the statement by Matt Hancock in the House of Commons this afternoon, and it's quite interesting, even with that socially distanced House of Commons, you can feel a mood, and it was an understandably dark one after the kind of, in some ways, overexcitement about the vaccine, overexcitement only in one level, that it's brilliant news that the efficacy rates are so high, but it was almost as if we'd all had this vaccine. But of course, we're not going to get it in most cases for quite some time. And this virus continues to rage in the meantime. So we're sort of refocusing on that reality. And another strain, even though we know little about it at the moment, adds to that sense of kind of almost helplessness as London closes down, as other cities will remain in tier 3, as Scotland continues to impose constraints, and we've heard more about Wales tonight and so on, and Northern Ireland. This is a virus that needs constraining by tough measures, it seems to me. There is no other way until we've all had the vaccine, or enough have.
Yes, and the Daily Mirror pointing out that by, 1 minute past midnight, Tuesday night into Wednesday morning, 34 million people will be in tier 3 after the London crackdown. That is a lot of people. It's a lot of restaurants, pubs, bars whose stock will no doubt rot on the job. But meantime, a lot of people asking about that question about Christmas. Daily Mail, is Christmas in jeopardy? Will this all prompt a rethink? And certainly the Times reporting Matt Hancock's words today, that if you really want to keep your family safe, you effectively need to start isolating from now, don't you, Ella?
Well, but the thing is, lots of people are doing that. I know, anecdotes aren't really worth much in this discussion because everyone's got an anecdote for their own point of view. But, I know lots of people, young people in my age, who have chosen to self-isolate in the run-up to the Christmas because they want to, they've got people in their family that they might be worried about. They just want to rule out any possibility of that being a risk. And I think, people are making sensible decisions. And rather than strengthening our ability and confidence to make those and giving people the resources to make those sensible decisions, I think part of the problem that people have, you don't need to be a lockdown skeptic to have a kind of an issue with the blunt instrument of not lockdown, but the tightening of restrictions around this, because really what it's saying is it's denying people the ability to have some semblance of normality while joining in the fight against the virus. And the difficult thing is, Steve is right. The numbers are worrying. They're, at the end of the day, the vaccine isn't coming quick enough for practical, kind of technical reasons in terms of resources. And we do need to maintain some form of restrictions to make sure that that rollout works properly, and that hopefully we can be in a different position in spring. But that doesn't mean that we ignore the consequences of these kinds of tier 3, which is basically lockdown and by another name, on people's lives and people's ability to organise their lives. The important thing I think about Christmas is it obviously doesn't make very much sense to, particularly in areas that you've put into tier 3, have such a stringent restrictions on people's lives, and then kind of have what will be painted as a free-for-all around Christmas. Why not take a different approach and think about how you could enable people to enjoy, and enjoy not being a flippant word, but really like revitalize themselves by seeing their loved ones in COVID-secure environments, in pubs, in social clubs, in areas where you could do things safely, rather than going back and sharing cramped sitting rooms at home. If you think a bit kind of innovatively about this, then maybe there would be another way around. I think the problem is that this government feels panicked. I think Steve said that there's a kind of dark mood. It feels panicked. It feels rushed. And as it has been throughout a lot of this process over the whole of 2020, you don't have a huge amount of confidence in what they're doing. And I think that's a dangerous feeling.
Yes, but to be fair, you are mingling with strangers when you go into hospitality venues, aren't you? Even depending, it doesn't matter how COVID secure they are.
Yeah. With masks on, briefly, with masks on, whenever I go into a pub, they kind of sanitize you up to the elbow, and everything's wiped down. And there's, I think the thing about this is there is always risk in everything. There is always going to be risk in everything, particularly when it comes to a pandemic. How do you balance being careful and protecting people, which is vital in a society that cares about one another, and not destroying our way of life irrevocably? Because the virus is one thing. The crisis of unemployment, the crisis of deepening financial issues for people, the crisis of mental health, cancer treatment, all these things are waiting to reveal themselves. The vaccine might be gone in spring, but we're not out of the woods yet, and that
I think no one's in any doubt what a difficult balancing line it is on all of those elements that you talked about, plus the spread of the virus. And I think the idea about doing Christmas this way is you control the numbers of people who are mixing, and so it isn't actually a free-for-all. Steve, well, you can talk...
Sorry to interrupt. It is, compared to what many people will be experiencing in the build-up to that break, it is close to a free-for-all. So, a lot of people will be in tier 3, and then suddenly say, oh, yeah, come indoors, 3 sets or whatever it is in a bubble or whatever. And every scientist assumes that this will lead to a spread of the virus and higher infections, and then the need for tougher constraints afterwards. It seems to me increasingly bonkers to have this sequence where everything virtually is locked down and then opened up for 4 or 5 days just because it's Christmas, which, as everyone has said, is not recognized by the virus. It doesn't go off for a few days. So I think this is going to become a bigger and bigger story. It's interesting, it's on the front page of the Mail, which was critical in the past of constraints. And I think this is going to become a bigger story. Why free-for-all then and a lockdown in effect immediately before?
And meanwhile, the Daily Star, many people have talked about surely children should be sent home early this week in order to stop that being a route of infection, if it is. The Royal Borough of Greenwich, for example, suggesting online learning now finds itself in a spat with the Education Secretary. As the Daily Star says, as thousands of kids are sent home from schools, we can't help but recall being told they were safe. We must not tell fibs all the way down there with the clowns at the bottom. Steve, the difficulty is, of course, 10 to 19-year-olds, I think it was 11 to 18-year-olds, however they describe it. It's the secondary school-age kids now, isn't it, that seem to be the source of some of those infections in London. Matt Hancock suggesting it's spread to other age ranges now. But does this butt up against, don't worry, send your children to school, it's safe for them and you?
Yeah, and of course, it's one of the big differences between the lockdown that happened recently and now the tier 3 restrictions with the lockdown in the spring, where kids weren't at school. Now, it was a good idea to get the kids back to school, but given all the evidence that originally, anyway, you're right, it's now spreading way beyond them, that they were catching it and spreading it, it does seem to me crazy to insist that they go into school for these last few days where, from my memory, not that long ago, of course, the last few days of a term, you don't really do that much anyway. It'd be great if they could go, but I can understand schools not wanting to send them.
Yes, OK. Reminded of Chris Whitty today saying when every option is a bad option. There's kind of no right answers here, are there? There's definitely a balance
it's all
here.
Terrible.
Ella, do you mind if we move on? I apologise. We're going to have to go to a break there. You can think about the answer you might have given. Apologies. Coming up, should the Prime Minister resign if he can't get a Brexit deal? Talk about that after the break. Well, welcome back. You're watching the press preview with me now, Steve Richards and Ella Whelan. The Brexit deadline of Sunday night obviously was missed. So we get to The Guardian. The deal is within reach after UK concessions, quoting Michel Barnier. Steve, tell us more.
Well, Barnier is claiming that the UK has moved on this. You know, we've talked about it for about 35 years, the level playing field and the degree to which the UK should be in line with the EU single market kind of rules and regulations and standards and so on, and over time as well. And there would have to be a mechanism to measure that. We don't know for sure, but that's what he's claiming. The fact that the talks are continuing suggests there has been a shift in that particular area, because why carry on talking if there's just nothing? So if there is a deal, I suspect it will have been the UK government to some extent recognising there is no such thing as a pure sovereignty in any trade deal, and certainly one with a much bigger economy, the European Union as a whole, compared with yours, the United Kingdom. So maybe we're moving finally towards a kind of reality after many years of fantastical claims.
We had a Spanish politician on yesterday. It's not about expressing your independence, having trade negotiations. It's how you manage interdependence, which obviously is where we're at. Give us your perspective, Ella, and the two other stories you want to do in relation to this on the second page of the Metro.
Yeah, I mean, all the stories look at the fact I have this kind of tone that finally the UK is coming to its senses and deciding that it can move. I take the opposite approach. I think most Brexiteers are looking at this and thinking, oh, well, all these red lines and all these deadlines and all these kind of ultimatums that Johnson and the British government said were sort of immovable, were principles that weren't going to be compromised, are now starting to be bent and shifted and disappeared. And I think we kind of knew that this was going to happen all along, because there is this, I think, actually sort of rather disingenuous portrayal of, well, not just disingenuous, it's rather ignorant portrayal of Brexit as simply a trade deal. There are two things going on here. One is the technical aspect of trying to unravel the UK to try and unravel itself from the intricacies of workings with the nature of trade deals, tariffs, all these things that involve the economic input of the European Union. And then for me, the much more important, much more central part of Brexit is the political question of independence, of sovereignty. And rather than it being, I disagree with Steve, rather than it being fantastical, it's about, can we make political change? And what this has come down to is the European Union saying, no, you can't. And Boris Johnson now saying, no, you can't. It's got with the status quo remains. And that's rather depressing. I think we need to look at the central question of what Brexit was about, which was, can we not just leave the European Union, but strike out a new politics focused around democracy, sovereignty, focused around the idea that the average person on the street has as much say as a professor or an expert or indeed a politician. That question still remains. The challenge of Brexit is still hung in the air, and whatever happens around fisheries or state aid might seem like small points, but that big question is still there. And I guarantee that people are still watching for an answer.
Apologies, our programme is drawing to a conclusion, but no doubt we can talk about it more should these talks continue to Christmas Eve or beyond. We will wait and see. Thank you both very much indeed. Ella, Steve, thank you very much.